let's make a podcast about the one skill that solves all relationship problems. And of course, she's smart and she looks at me saying, "Oh, really?" Like, right. And
The
I
one.
know it sounds
Yeah.
ridiculous, but we did. And so I will tell you and your listeners, no extra charge. Here it is. The one skill that solves all relationship problems relates very much to what you were just talking about. It is the ability to be moderately annoyed. That is the skill, which is to say, mild or moderately annoyed without freaking out. It's that very thing you were talking about, because the one thing that is a certainty for you and me and our respective spouses and children and everybody else who exists is we're all annoying as hell.
Oh my God, yes.
Leo season's here, and if you've been craving the courage to show up and be truly seen, I made something for you. Safe to Be Seen is my new seasonal workbook filled with soul-centered prompts, mirror work, and grounding rituals to help you embody your light without fear. This isn't about performance, it's about presence, and you're ready. Download it now at my website, empoweredwithmelisahepner.org, or you can go to my link tree on my Instagram, and there is a link directly there.
Emotionally unavailable.
Okay. So, you listen to a show, so you know that I'm going to do a separate intro whenever it's time to post the episode. And for here, we just get right into it. And I'm not like, I shouldn't be rushing you off too fast at the end because my next one has a little window before it. So I was reading your profile again this morning, and I don't know why I have a little special place for people who work in relationships, because I feel like for myself, every ounce of any real learning that I've done in this lifetime has been through significant relationships, because I had to figure out all the ways in which I was the problem. Like, literally, I was the problem. Like, this is the thing, is that I'm on my second marriage, but like, yeah, they have their stuff. I'm not acting like either of these men are perfect, but like, I'm so much the problem.
I get,
So,
if you're feeling that way, that speaks well in terms of your willingness to look at that at least.
oh,
It
thank
can't
you.
be that you're the only problem because it never is true. But it's,
Right.
certainly speaks well of your willingness to look and see, well, maybe you are contributing to it because everybody contributes to it. That's how that works.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think too, I wonder how much you see of, because I noticed that one of your books was written on essentially overcoming betrayal in a relationship.
Yep. That's my
And
most recent one. Yeah.
oh, that's your most recent one. Okay, we'll
Yep.
get into that because I what I learned in just this last year is that betrayal and neglect are kind of my number one wounds. Like, they're the ones that are just
Mm.
wide open at all times. And the part that I really struggled with, my MO was to feel that betrayed feeling, but not understand why. Like, I could recognize it, even though I was really disconnected from myself and everything. I recognized this feels like betrayal, but it was embarrassing because I couldn't like understand why I would feel betrayed over really minor things
Mm.
that other
Yeah.
people maybe would find insignificant.
Hmm.
Like, we haven't had infidelity to overcome, but betrayal just in itself, but it was my perception of the betrayal, obviously. And so understanding that, and the fact, like, the two biggest fights I've ever had with this man are the fact that I was constantly feeling betrayed, and now I can identify it as neglected, because if anything went wrong and I was left to deal with it by myself, it triggered all of those feelings of the
Hmm.
weight of the world is on my shoulders alone to help, no one to help me carry it. So I would love to dive into this book, and I know it probably is not about that type of betrayal, but I think
Well,
betrayal in
actually,
general needs to be addressed.
well, I mean, one of the earliest chapters actually addresses that very issue, which is to say, do you have to think of it as betrayal? Because,
Right.
as you've noted, or you've implied, betrayal is a big word. It's like, yeah, we don't use the
Yes.
word betrayal for, oh, you forgot to, pick up the dry cleaning. It's
Mm-hmm.
like betrayal typically means something where, I mean, the way I sort of define it, I might try not to get too black and white about the definition, but it's when somebody has done something, it's got to be something big to call it a betrayal usually, where you would never have expected them to do that based on your relationship with them. So, a husband can betray you in ways that a friend can't. Friends can betray you too, but you don't have the same expectations. So,
Yeah, because
the
betrayal
classic
comes
one,
from whatever your expectation was.
exactly. Yeah. And that's where it gets interesting. So that phenomenon where you were saying you felt betrayed by things that, when you think about it, most people probably wouldn't say that's a betrayal. It's like, no, somebody
Mm-hmm.
just screwed up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, what's your language code in this? I think like anything goes.
It's explicit, yeah.
That's what I thought. Just kidding. So if I said somebody fucked up a little bit, that's okay to say.
That's perfect. Love it.
Just
Then
kidding.
I
Yeah.
know I'm in the kind of company that's not gonna like message me later and be upset about my bad language.
Good. Okay. Just checking because I've been interviewed on a lot of these podcasts, and every once in a while it's like one wants to be careful and respectful, of one's language. But anyway,
Understood.
the point being, just minor little fuck ups like that are not typically what we call betrayal, but that doesn't mean you wouldn't perceive it that way, and that's important. You're perceiving it that way.
Yes.
Your reactions are about that because that's the thing. When your perception is you've been betrayed, kind of by definition, if it's feeling like betrayal, it's big. It feels like, wow, I'm at great risk here, and it tends to be accompanied with some kind of panic.
Yes.
And panic is not terribly conducive to working it out.
It really
You know,
isn't. It really
Yeah.
isn't. What do you think about like, and did you address this in your book? I like to be so careful about betrayal, just any of these woundings, but betrayal and neglect specifically. It was when I started to understand, like, okay, this is what it is. And then the next step was, oh, it was only my perception of the,
Mhm.
like you have to understand that this wasn't his intent and he does not understand.
Mhm.
So throughout the process of my husband listening to the show, he's gotten very familiar with me talking about that stuff, and he now understands I'm not placing the blame on you. Now,
Mhm.
let me be clear, I did used to. Like, that's the thing. That's why it was so, I would pick a fight over something else because that felt more comfortable than to be like, this
Yes.
feels like betrayal and I don't understand why. But now, in this new learning of mine, I am very willing to say it is what's coming up in me, and here's how you can help. And I think
Mhm.
that's the part that your partner, male or female, has to be really tender about, is that as long as, and also with the caveat that you're going to understand that life is messy, humans are messy, we're not going to do it perfect every time
Yep.
on both parties, but that I am just saying this is what's coming up in me and this is how you can help, and you be the person who's tender enough to just help me walk through that, ask
Mhm.
questions, maybe don't react if I did say that a little harshly, like,
Mhm.
because listen, honey, I have PMS this week, so probably nothing
Yep.
I've said has been communicated real sweet.
Mhm.
But do you address kind of that partner aspect of one person understanding their feeling and then the
Oh
other,
yeah.
like, how to support that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's I address that actually in some of my other books too.
I love
The
this.
the idea, it's funny. So my wife and I do my wife's Judy Alexander and I do a podcast called Couples Therapy in 7 Words. This is relevant to what we're talking about here.
I
So what are
love
the
it.
7 words? I happen to have it. We have merch, I have it on a cup. And for people who are watching this, or people who are
Yeah.
just hearing it, be kind, don't panic, and have faith. That's the 7 words. There's our logo for people who are watching this, Couples Therapy in 7 Words. You
I
can
love
find that
that.
anywhere. Yeah. And what do I mean by those words? Why is that relevant to what we're talking about? Well, the origin of that little motto was, decades ago when I was in a consultation group with a few colleagues. We would talk about our work and then bounce our work off each other. And we must have been talking about couples therapy. I don't really remember what we were talking about, but on the way out the door, literally, we're getting up to leave. And a colleague and friend of mine said, how do you do couples therapy anyway? It's a silly question. Like I'm supposed to summarize that on the way out the door. But I
Right.
had actually given it a bit of thought. And I said, well, if you boil it all down, I realize this is ridiculously oversimplifying, but if you boil it all down, basically what I'm telling people is be kind and don't panic. Because if you're in a panic, you can't be kind. And the kindness is exactly what you're describing. You're looking for grace from your partner,
Yeah.
that sense of, And it's funny you mentioned, PMS, which is, I'm I'm a guy for people who are, like I am a cisgendered heterosexual male, so it's like that's always a hot button for guys because we don't know exactly what that feels like. We're hormonal too, by the way. We just don't call it that. When
Right.
we get pissed off, we're being hormonal too. But
Yes.
that phenomenon that women are so much more familiar with, that idea that says, why am I grumpy? It's probably not external. It's probably hormonal. You have that
Mm-hmm.
experience in ways that men don't get to detect in the same way.
Sure. Yeah.
So just that phenomenon, it's like saying, oh, for crying, and I say this to guys, or, this is good advice for guys, like, cut her some slack here. We don't know what that feels like, but she's not crazy, evil, or stupid. Neither are you.
Right.
If
Right.
she's grumpy, and then she's got her good reasons. And if you can be graceful about it, it's going to work a lot better. So that's the sense of kindness you're looking for. Well, when you're in a panic, you can't. And that's the thing. When you're perceiving yourself as betrayed, that's panic stuff. That's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, who are you? And I don't know if I can trust you anymore. And I don't know if I can trust my own judgment anymore. If I'm being betrayed by this person that I
Yes.
was trusting, what's the matter with me? All of that stuff
Mm-hmm.
is panic. And of course, the problem comes up with respect to a partner. You know, I don't know your husband, but I'll bet he's a human being. Just wild guess. These days, it could be an AI person, but I'll
It
bet it's
could
an actual
be.
human being. And actual human beings he's got his own panic factors. He's got his own
Mm-hmm.
background. He's got his own things that panic him. And if he's panicked by your panic, then you're off and running. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? If he senses in your being upset at him and he has no idea why or he doesn't think it's appropriate or whatever, and he's feeling, oh my God, my wife has just abandoned me. I'm about to lose my marriage, and he starts to panic.
Mm-hmm.
And you're both in a panic and no good comes of that. So the be kind and don't panic part is all about that. If you can't be kind if you're in a panic. So I started sharing that 5 words. That's only 5 words. You have to count and to get right five. So it's only 5 words. And I started sharing that with folks I was working with, and they would say, wow, I get what you're saying there. Tell me, how do you not panic? And I realized, well, they had me there, right? Because,
You're like, hey, that's a different book.
well, it is, but I mean, I included it. It's like, well, you got a good question there. I don't have a simple answer, a simple how to, but I do have a description. I started thinking about, okay, who are the thing about couples, especially, who are the couples, the couples come in and look, nobody makes, as I so often point out, nobody makes a first appointment with me just to tell me how well everything is going, right?
Right.
If a couple makes an appointment with me, it's because there's a shit show going on of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're upset about something. Right, I get it. What do they need me for? So it's funny. Later this afternoon, I have the one exception to that, or the occasional exception to that. Every once in a while, I am asked to do premarital counseling. I have a session coming up of that. I haven't met these folks yet this afternoon, so I hope it's an
That's
exception.
different. Yeah.
Usually it's an exception. Occasionally not. Occasionally, like, oh shit, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
but
Are
but
y'all
more
sure
often,
y'all
it's
want to do
like
this?
I think these folks, their pastor suggested, they should do premarital counseling, and I'm not a rabbi, but I can play one on television, that that
Exactly.
thing. And so I mean, it's I'm not going to give them religious counseling per se, but I'm happy to talk to folks, about what might come up for them. But
Yeah.
usually, the reason people are making appointments with me is because they're having serious problems, and they're often in a panic about it. And
Mm-hmm.
what I noted is that the couples that would come to me dealing with hard stuff, they're dealing with infidelity. I'm guessing about half the couples that come to see me are probably dealing with infidelity. Very, very common problem. Or other kinds of betrayals. Somebody lied about their financial activities and now they're
Mm-hmm.
in deep shit. Or, other kinds of betrayals of various sorts. The couples that could get through that and work it through and come out the other side feeling like, wow, that was hard, but we're so much better off. They were couples who manifested what I call faith. Now, by faith, I don't necessarily mean religious faith, although religious faith can be like this, but it isn't always. What I mean by faith is that basic sense that says, okay, this is really hard. This is painful. We don't understand it, but there's something about it that's got to be meaningful, even though, yeah, you shouldn't have cheated, but I know you're not crazy. I know you're not evil. I know you're not
Right.
stupid. You did it. You chose to do things that even you are saying is wrong. We better look at it, as opposed to the couples that didn't show faith were the ones who came in, and the one who cheated is saying, "Oh my God, I don't know what happened. I must have been crazy. I'll never do it again." And the other person is saying, "You're damn right, you'll never do it again." And, we just want to go back to how it was. Well, you can't go back to how it was.
Right.
And the couples that showed faith were the ones who recognized that. It's like, okay, we're in new territory here, but we're
Yeah.
going to have to face it. And they could face it because they had the sense that, you know, it's that little assumption I started with about when I assume about everybody. You know what? I'm going to start with the assumption you're not crazy, you're not evil, and you're not stupid. So there's
I
something
love
valid
that.
about this, even if it's wrong. There's something like we better look at. And the couples that could do that, that's what I call faith. So I added the 2 words, have faith. So now it's 7 words, be kind, don't panic, and have faith. So the question still arises, well, okay, Smarty, if faith is the antidote to panic, that's nice. How do I acquire faith? You know? And I don't have a simple formula for how to acquire faith. What I claim is that faith is a practice. It's not something you can read in a book. It's not anything you can prove true or false. That's ridiculous. I mean, I can't prove that the world is right to be what it is, even with all the shit in it. And I can't prove that the world is terrible to be what it is, even with all the shit in it. It's easy to prove that there's shit in it. Everybody agrees with that. It's also, there's joy in it. There's all of it. So how do I claim that there's something meaningful about the whole business? Well, that's a choice. That's not something you can prove or disprove. That's a choice. That's the practice.
No,
So,
you're absolutely right. And when I have worked with clients who have experienced the significant levels of betrayal in their relationship, um, you know, I would say I'm lucky in the types of clients I've gotten, but I feel like they were sent to me, but
mhm,
uh I always talk about multiple layers of truth in
mm,
that if you're saying they did this and I feel this, that's fair. That's
mhm,
fair. And you're right, they did do that. But if we were to expand our consciousness a little bit and you start to see how we got there, like not this relationship, why would a person make this decision?
yeah.
And get them really in to their own wounding and understand why they've made very similar decisions, even if it wasn't stepping out on their marriage or whatever. I can find ways that you lie to your spouse too, or hide
Hmm.
things, or and it was when I did that for myself where I started, because it started with hearing kind of about the mirror effect, that we are just mirrors for each other and we're like projecting our own insecurities and blah blah blah. I started because I used to be very judgmental of everyone, but
Mm,
particularly my spouse. But I think
hmm.
it's because I just felt so unsafe all the time. So, you know how, hello. But so I was very judgmental. And when I started to go, okay, I'm going to test this and say, if I don't like this about him, what does that say about me? What do I not like about me? Is it the same thing? Yes, mostly. Usually it is the exact same
Hmm.
thing that I don't like, that I do it too. But usually I can figure it out. And once I started to see the different ways I do that too. Like I can't be mad at you anymore, because if I'm going to learn to give myself the amount of forgiveness and love and understanding that I deserve, then
Hmm.
I've got to be able to be willing to give that to others too. And
Well,
my whole life really changed there.
you just described 2 chapters of my book. Right?
Yeah.
You just wrote 2 chapters of my book right there. Yeah, because it's the title of the book we're talking about is Betrayal and Forgiveness. And indeed, exactly what you were saying about forgiveness. I talk about actually 3 steps to forgiveness, and you just described 2 of them. So I'll talk briefly about each one. Step
Yeah.
one is actually, I claim step one is to forgive yourself.
Mhm.
It's that recognition that, okay, because anytime anybody gets hurt, we're always going to blame ourselves partly.
Yeah.
Even if it's something someone else did that it's not your fault that they did it, but
Yeah.
okay, why didn't I see that coming? Why didn't I
Right.
prevent
I
it? How
should
could I
have
be so
known they
blind?
would do that.
I should have
Mhm.
known. Yes, the classic.
Mhm.
I should have known. Well, you know what? You didn't know. And you didn't know because you didn't know. You didn't know because not because there's anything wrong with you. You didn't know because you didn't know. We learn
Right.
stuff. So when you can reach that place of saying, well, I guess I was doing the best I could. I wish I had known, but I didn't. I am
Yeah.
who I am. I was who I was. I can accept that. That's forgiving yourself. And it's a really short step from there to very much what you were saying, to forgive whoever hurt you. It's like, well, shit, if I was doing the best I could, I guess on some level they were too. I wish they
Mm-hmm.
hadn't, I wish they'd been thinking differently. I wish they hadn't been nursing a resentment against me, and that's what would lead them to cheat, because that's often the case.
Mm-hmm.
It's often how someone justifies it. I wish they hadn't, but damn it, I can sort of see how they were. That's what forgiving the other person is like, well, shit, you were doing the best you could too. So you just described that. It's like, yeah, when you realize, well, it's kind of hard to blame your husband for things that you recognize you do yourself. If you
Right.
can forgive yourself, then you can forgive him for that. Now, of course, you did have to forgive yourself for that. It's like, well, yeah,
And
I
I
kind of,
did. Yeah. And
yeah.
that you're so right. And let me throw this out there just for anyone who's gotten triggered by us so far.
Mm.
If you don't want to forgive it, you don't have to. We're talking about the
Yes.
people who have come into session choosing to move forward in this relationship, or at least try to. If you don't want to, no one's hating on you, baby. So that's that. But we're
Oh,
talking
yeah.
for the people who want to, and they're not better than you. We're not saying that. We're just saying.
No, and let me address that because that's a really important point. Um, and of course, part of it depends on what you mean by forgive and what you don't mean by forgive. So I have
Mm-hmm.
a way of understanding forgiveness, and I didn't make this up. But a lot of times when people say I forgive you, what they mean is, okay, I'll restore the relationship. We can get past this, I'll restore the relationship. I do not use it that way. I use it in a much different sense. When I say forgive, it's entirely an internal process. It's like,
Yes.
if I forgive someone who hurt me, it has nothing to do with my relationship with them at that point. It means I don't have to, I don't have to freak out when I think about it. It's
I'm not
processing the
taking it
trauma.
personally.
Yeah, it's like, okay, shit, that happened. I wish it hadn't. All right, now I got to figure out, can I trust this person? Can I restore the relationship? Whole different set of questions.
Yes.
So, in that sense, if you think of forgiveness that way, yes, indeed, part of healing is always forgiveness in that sense. But I also point out, and other people have said this too, there are circumstances where you need that anger. If you're
Yeah.
still being hurt, if you're in an abusive relationship, that's not the time to get all forgiving what's going on.
No.
If you need to be pissed off, be pissed off. That will motivate you to get out and get safe.
Mm-hmm.
So, indeed, it can be way premature to suggest that someone forgives somebody, even in
Mm-hmm.
that narrow sense, even in the sense of kind of letting go of the anger. No, you might need that anger, but eventually, when you're in a safe spot, safe enough spot, that's when I would say, yeah, it's hard to know even what to do about the relationship if you're still freaked out by it. So if
Yeah.
you need to get past the freak out, and that's another way of saying you need to forgive. You need to forgive yourself, forgive the other. Just again, doesn't mean it's okay. You can forgive someone and still divorce them. You can forgive someone and still prosecute them in court. You can forgive somebody
Absolutely.
and still sue them. All of those things, they have nothing to do with whether or not you've forgiven them. Forgiven just means you're not burdened by it. Everybody likes to quote Anne Lamott at this point, and so do I. And she's a novelist who's written a lot about this stuff. And she says, to not forgive is like drinking rat poison and waiting for the rat to die. It's like you're carrying the poison. You need to get the poison out of you. Then you can worry about the rat, but you need
Yeah,
to get
and
the poison out of you.
like I think it's okay too if that's not even the word that you want to use for it. Like if it
Hmm.
literally is just restoring your own peace, like call it
Yes.
that, whatever it is. But because I know like for myself and in other interpersonal relationships, like I don't have contact with 98% of the people I'm related to.
Mm.
And I've taken some judgment for that, particularly because people feel like my kids have missed out on extra love because I
Hmm.
didn't choose to have them around these family members either because I was like, well, they were toxic for me. Why would I want my children around them? The love
Hmm.
doesn't outweigh the toxicity. Anyway, I've come to this place recently where I can hold very firmly both perspectives of I get that all of you were doing what you'd been taught to do and that we were all enmeshed in this generational cycle and passing down generational trauma. I do forgive. I do. I see the humanity in not just them, everyone now, and how I make those exact same mistakes, and I do forgive myself. So I can forgive them, but I also don't trust or have any faith in those relationships
Yeah. Yeah.
to like the if I were to be around them, it wouldn't be for me because I've done just fine without them,
Hmm.
and I don't actually care if my kids are missing extra love or whatever the thing people say
Hmm.
is. But I think it can be tricky because you've got these, probably the same people who were saying never miss a Monday at the gym, just harping on this toxicity of not forgiving. And there are some acts. Listen, those people hurt me emotionally, but like there are some things that you're the only one who gets to decide when you release that stuff. But I think where the problem is, or where we can get triggered with panic before we really give it thought, is that we're not understanding that when you do offer that forgiveness and compassion and love for yourself first, it's almost impossible to not go ahead and lay down that cross with the other
Yeah.
person. I mean, you
Yeah.
don't ever have to be around them again, and I think I've
Right.
chosen for myself. I don't think I will, but I
Yeah.
also don't hate them. And
Yeah.
every day of healing brings new restoration around the hurts that have been there. I'm not really hurt anymore. I don't care anymore, but I also don't have any desire to be around any of them, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And, I will simply note that it's fascinating. We actually have interviewed two different people separated by a couple of years who've written about the issue of family estrangement, very much the
Mm-hmm.
stuff you're talking about, which is incredibly common. I'm sure that doesn't surprise you. A guy named Carl Pillimer we interviewed a few years ago now, back I think 2021, something like that. Um, and he wrote a book called Fault Lines, which he's a sociologist, and
Okay.
he did a bunch of really interesting research on how prevalent family estrangements are. He found that in the United States, at least as of a few years ago, roughly 1 in 4 people are currently in some sort of estrangement, much as you described. Currently.
Wow.
That's not people who ever are. That's like currently. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
I
It's
wouldn't have
really
guessed the
common.
number to be that high.
Yeah, and he's not talking about divorces there, by the way. He's talking
Yeah.
about like the very stuff you're talking about. But he also noted that he found a subset of people in his research that had at least attempted reconciliation. And some of those had succeeded and some of those had failed. And every single person who at least attempted it, and some of these, by the way, were after decades,
Uh-huh.
not like after a few months, but like 40 years later, everyone who attempted it was glad they had attempted it, even when it didn't work out, even when they said, "Oh, yep, now I see why I
Yeah.
see it's still true. I better stay away from these folks." But at least I tried. But the ones who succeeded, it was fascinating, and I'm always fascinated by that because you just never know. You never know
Yeah.
what's going to happen. So what he found was the folks that successfully reconnected with folks they'd been estranged from for a long time. One of the things that they characteristically did was they gave up on the need for the apology. They gave up on the need for the other person to even understand what assholes they'd been. You know what I mean? They just said, it's been decades. We both lived whole lives, bunches of life since then. I wonder what's going on. And they'll establish contact. And often the initial contacts, if the other person is willing, is pretty superficial.
Mm-hmm.
It's like talking about the weather, maybe talking about the kids, just be careful.
Yeah.
And over time, what they would find, and again, not everybody, some people, that's where it would stay. It would be superficial. It's like, okay, good, we can go to the family reunion and not hate each other, and that's good. We're not going to talk much, but it's cool. But other people, they would, break the ice and kind of get to know each other again after decades of experience, or even whatever, years of experience. And one or the other would say, I've been meaning to tell you, I feel kind of bad about what went on back then. I think I was kind of a jerk. I'm really sorry about that. And the other one will say, I'm glad you're saying that because I was kind of a jerk too. No, they'll find this sense of, you're not the same people after all that life. You've learned
Right.
stuff. So again, I'm not trying to say everybody can do that because they can't.
Right.
Sometimes what you come to discover in that attempt at reconciliation is confirmation about why you cut off in the first place. It's like, well, okay, I see why I did that. I better still do that. But it's just interesting because whether or not you even do the reconciliation part, it's the part you're describing. When you can just get the poison out of you, then,
Yes.
and like you said, when you've forgiven yourself about that, especially what you were saying about learning about yourself, it's like, well, I've been kind of a jerk too, haven't I?
Oh
Shit,
God,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, it's like, I guess they've been jerks and I've been jerks. Damn,
Yeah.
we're all
Hmm.
jerks sometimes, not always, not
Yeah, but
mostly.
we are all sometimes.
And it's kind of,
Yeah.
it's a necessary survival skill, the ability, it's funny to call it an ability, the ability to be an asshole. It's
Yeah.
part of our survival mechanism. Sometimes you got to be bad. And I'm not,
Yes.
I don't like it, but you can't, you can't get rid of it. When I used to do a lot of work with folks who were healing from trauma, actually, before now I've been doing almost all couples therapy for a long time. But before that, did a lot of work with folks who were recovering from trauma, and they would often they would have this side of them that was really destructive, like often self-destructive. And,
Hmm.
early on in my work, I was thinking, oh my God, our job here is to get rid of that horrible part of you why are you cutting yourself? Why are you feeling
Yeah.
suicidal? And often cutting yourself isn't suicidal, by the way, that's another story. But, why are you doing these things to yourself? And then I came to realize, no, you can't dismiss important parts of people even when they're doing bad shit. It's
Yeah.
like, well, it's there for a reason, it's part of the whole story. And when you can accept it, then often people will be able to incorporate it into the rest of them and say, oh, well, I don't really want to cut myself, but it was important to express this pain. Well, there are other ways of
Yeah.
doing that without cutting myself. Well, cool. But and again, it's not just a simple matter of logical insight, it's a process. But that phenomenon, you can't dismiss any parts of anybody because it turns out to be important. And that's true of a couple as well. It gets
So
back to that
hear
notion of
them.
faith. It's like
Yes.
you're valid to be who you are, even when you're screwing up royally. So we better look at that. We better appreciate there's something meaningful in what you're doing here, even though you shouldn't be doing it.
Do you find that some people voice to you at all? Because this is something that I've heard a few people say. Um, Even if they're just talking about like my response to one of my children's behavior, like if I'm really chill about it,
Mhm.
like some people feel like that compassion, understanding, forgiveness is a lack of accountability. Have you
Yeah.
heard people say that, and what are your thoughts about
Oh,
that?
absolutely. Yeah. In fact, it comes up in couples therapy, particularly
Mm-hmm.
when, it can feel like a very thin line between, on the one hand, justifying what somebody did, and on the
Right.
other hand, looking at the context.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really common for, let's say somebody is the cheater and somebody was cheated on. The person who's cheated on, when you start asking about, well, what was your relationship like before? And they will often, and I understand this, I can see why they would, they'll often feel like, wait a second, you're just making excuses for this bastard's, for what he
Mm-hmm.
did, Ed or she, not always he. Um, but you're just making excuses for bad behavior. What about accountability? And I understand that. That's a legitimate complaint. It's also true that there was a context. So
Right.
both things are true. And often the context is that there were issues in the relationship. It's funny. I will throw in here, just for what it's worth, there's a zillion reasons why people cheat, in what are supposed to be monogamous relationships. There's a zillion reasons why people do. And they're not always about something wrong in the relationship. It's interesting.
Right.
It's sometimes the one who cheated will be saying, "Oh no, my God, I have a wonderful marriage. I love my wife or husband or whatever. We have great sex life. That wasn't the problem. This other thing just appealed to me, whatever. I mean, they have problems with monogamy maybe, but not with their spouse.
Right. Yeah.
So that happens. But that's, I think, the exception more than the rule in the folks I work with. Much more often, it's like the person who cheated feels bad, but by the time they get to me, they've
They're
acknowledged that they're
covered in their
cheating
own
usually.
shame.
It's only
Yeah.
happened once in 30 years of private practice. One time. I've only had one session where the bomb was dropped in the session. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
Every other time, I'll tell
shit.
you, yeah, you know what I mean by that. Every other time, people come to me, and one of my first questions is always, "Gee, why are you doing this now as opposed to 6 months ago or six?" In other words, was there something that precipitated this? And that, if they
Yeah.
haven't already told me, that's when they're going to say, "Well, yeah, it turns out he had an affair or she had an affair or whatever."
Yeah.
But it only happened one time when I asked that question, and they said, "Oh, we just thought, we've needed this for a while." A lot of times people say that. If there hasn't been something like infidelity, they'll
Mm-hmm.
say, "Well, looking back, we should have been here 5 years ago." Whatever. Understand that. But this one time it was an answer like that. And then if they haven't said anything about infidelity, the two things I make sure to ask about pretty early on are infidelity and substance abuse. Not because,
Good
not
point.
because either one of those things like, oh my God, I can't work with you. It's more like just good to get those things on the table.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'll ask about infidelity and say, well, and this is usually how I'll say it. I'll say, when I ask that question about why now, often people will say, well, because somebody was having an affair. Any infidelity going on? And only once in 30 years did one person say, no, no infidelity. And the other person said, well, I've been meaning to tell you.
Oh my
Boom.
God.
Yeah. So I don't recommend that.
Yeah.
In maybe 3 or 4 times over 30 years, I've gotten a phone call beforehand where somebody has said, look, I've cheated on my spouse and they don't know it yet. Should I tell them in the session? And I will usually say, I mean, you can do what you want, but it usually works a lot better if you tell them before, because it has to come. Now that you've told me, I can't work with you unless you've told the other person. I can't keep that secret. So unless it comes out really early in the session, I can't work with you. That there are therapists who wouldn't say that, by the way, but I do. I
I'm
will not
glad
keep
you
secrets
do.
from folks. And
Yeah.
it's not like I have to blurt it out. It's like they both have to trust that I'm on both their side, essentially.
Yes.
So I will always say, no, the session will be much more, if you've already gotten through the initial shock phase, the session will be more useful to you. But that one time, I mean, we got through and I think they came back, as I recall. I don't remember. It was years ago.
So you had to take your own advice and not panic, huh?
Yeah. Well, and so much, well, that's why you work with folks, right? So much of the work of being a therapist or a coach or whatever is to not panic. you know
Yeah.
I've actually often commented to that. I've said two different things to this, and I could say either one. I say, what's the main job of the therapist? Well, one way of saying it is the main job of the therapist is to be the one in the session who's not panicking,
Mm-hmm.
the one with a relatively calm nervous system, the one who hears some like awful thing, and instead of saying, "Oh my God," and again, I'm not saying don't be human about it. Of course, I've had saying, "Oh my God, that's awful," but instead of saying, "Oh my God, that's awful," we have to panic. It's, "Oh my God, that's awful. Tell me more about that. Like, what was going on?" Be curious, and you
Yeah.
can't do that if you're in a panic. And
There you
the other
go.
thing I'll say is very similar to what I was talking about before. It's like, yeah, the job of the therapist is to be the one who's manifesting faith. I'm the one who can say, well, we
Yeah.
better look at this as meaningful, even though it's painful. Let's, it's the same thing. It's really the same thing. It's like, be curious, because I say
Yeah.
faith is the antidote to panic.
Yeah, I like that. Well, and on the notion of accountability, I I think I discovered for myself why I even thought that at one point that, the shame and blame was, you got to take the accountability. I can remember wanting to make a choice to let some things go in this marriage, like, like, oh, okay, I'm probably making too big of a deal about it and I've just got to move past this. But so much of me was so pissed that he wasn't like he needed a punishment. Like
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
like it's not fair. I just experienced 24 hours of blah blah blah
yeah,
because of your actions and you what just get my grace? No.
yeah,
Mm-mm. So I like fought for fairness or equity, it felt. I know that all of that was a facade now, but at the time it was like and then you can't just if you don't have a single tool in your toolbox for dealing with that, you can't logic your way out of any of that.
right.
And so I would be in some sort of spiral just for hours until like I would have to exhaust myself from how much energy I was putting into it
Yeah,
before I could calm and be like, well, everyone's punished equally. Okay, great. But it really would just have to take that exhaustion. Whereas now I just understand like I'm only holding you to this cross because it's the perfectionist cross that I would hold myself to.
yeah,
Anytime I
exactly.
make a mistake, this is the way I treat myself.
Yeah,
And so I expect you to treat yourself like that and allow me to. And
yeah,
and that's been the real big growth for me is just understanding like I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, and we're going to do so many things wrong and it's okay.
Yeah, it's funny. We did a podcast of last year. You'll relate to the circumstance. We do this podcast, and we like to make a pretty much a one episode a week. And so we were all ready to go, and we had a guest lined up, and the guest had an emergency and didn't show. So we're sitting there thinking, well, we want to make the podcast. And I said to my wife, she's not a therapist, by the way. We like to say she's a retired educator. Um,
Oh.
and so she's used to dealing with people too, but from a very
Mm-hmm.
different perspective. She was the principal of our synagogue religious school for many years, and she deals with folks in various ways. But we like to say, I'm the therapist and she's the real person. So, and she's very good. She's very good with the hook as needed. She's very nice about it, but it's like I can get going, and she's good about reining me in. It works well.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I said to her, we're sitting there thinking, well, now what are we going to do? We could say, well, we could skip it, but we didn't want to. I said, I know. Let's make a podcast about the one skill that solves all relationship problems. And of course, she's smart, and she looks at me saying, "Oh, really?" Like, "Oh, right." And
The
I
one.
know it sounds
Yeah.
ridiculous, but we did, and so I will tell you and your listeners, no extra charge. Here it is. The one skill that solves all relationship problems relates very much to what you were just talking about. It is the ability to be moderately annoyed. That is the skill, not which is to say, mild or moderately annoyed without freaking out. It's that very thing you were talking about, because the one thing that is a certainty for you and me and our respective spouses and children and everybody else who exists is we're all annoying as hell.
Oh my God, yes.
We are, and there's a guy, what's his name? Alain de Botton. I think that's the French pronunciation, although he writes in English. Anyway, he wrote, I didn't read the book, but I read an article based on the book. It's called Why You Will Marry the Wrong Person. And he's not cynical about marriage at all. He's not saying, oh, nobody should ever get married. He's not cynical. What he said was, look, any person you select to be your spouse will bring with them a series of annoyances. And if you
Yeah.
change your spouses, you will simply change for a different set of annoyances. And nobody exists who isn't somewhat annoying. I know I am way more annoying than my wife is. I will tell you that much. That's clear. Our marriage works so well because she's so gracious about my being so annoying. She's really nice. I mean, she'll
My
tell
husband's
me,
the same way. I'm the annoying one.
yeah. Maybe it's the therapy thing. I don't know. We tend to be annoying people. I don't know.
That must be it.
Yeah, but and look, it's better for, I always tell guys this, especially, it's better for us to recognize ourselves as the annoying one because it works better that way. Just, it encourages accountability.
I mean,
doesn't
don't
it?
play. I'm annoyed by him nonstop, but
Well,
it's
there you
not
go.
like his
Yeah.
personality as much as like his messiness. But
Well,
that's
yeah,
fine.
there's always something. There's
Yeah.
going to be something. And when a relationship is going well, those dots don't get connected. You know what I mean? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, well, that's annoying, but that's just him or her. It's like, whatever. Because the overriding narrative when things are going well is, oh my God, I'm so grateful to have this person in my life.
Yes.
It's such a blessing to have this person in my life that of course they're annoying somewhat, and I am too, but oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, it's so that just overrides all the rest of it. So the annoyances just stay annoying, and they're nothing. They don't amount to anything. You laugh at them. That's John Gottman's stuff where he talks about the various things that can cause problems in relationships or make relationships go well. He notes that he followed couples and some of them for like 25 years, and he found that the number of things they would report that were these sort of annoying differences didn't change much. I mean, it's about two-thirds of them were still there 20 years later.
Yeah.
But what distinguished the couples that did well from the couples that didn't do well were that they handled them with grace. They handled them, they would laugh at them, or they would just handle them, or they would just be minor annoyances. They would just accept them. It was like, oh, whatever, it's going to be fine. And conversely, and this kind of relates to the accountability question, actually. Conversely, when things aren't going well, when you have that doubt about, can I trust myself and this person, then any of those annoyances suddenly becomes yet more evidence for how, fucked
Yep.
up this relationship is.
Yep.
And it constantly you're being reminded of that because the annoyances are still there, except they're no longer
Yes.
annoyances. Now they're more and more evidence for why things are no go.
Evidence. Exactly
Yeah.
right.
And then then it's easy to justify that. It's easy to justify being righteously indignant in terms of
Yes.
accountability. I want to say one other thing
Yes.
about the accountability, because you mentioned kids, right? And it's true between couples, but I think it's clearer when you're talking about kids. How do you manage to hold kids accountable in a way that will actually help?
Right.
And I am not squeamish about the notion of punishment as a tool. I'm not talking about, violence. I'm talking
Yeah,
about,
yeah, yeah.
time out or depriving them of a privilege or something like that. I'm not squeamish about any of that. It's just fascinating, though, that the kids for whom punishment works are the kids for whom you hardly ever have to do it.
Yeah.
Punishment works when it's like, okay, I got the message. Good.
Yeah, they learn usually the easy way. Like they don't
Yes.
usually make those types of errors like, and then once it happens once, like I was that kid.
Hmm.
I got a kid who doesn't learn shit from shit. Like he has to learn the hard way over and over and
Well,
over.
yeah, and often that's where it's interesting because it's not that you don't hold that kid accountable also, but you
Right.
have to do it in ways that take account of who that particular kid is. And often
Yes.
there's elements there where, if a kid's coming at it from the standpoint of feeling like all I am is a fuck up, and punishing them
Yes.
is not going to improve their behavior, it's just going to convince them
No.
that they're a fuck up.
Well, and
And if they're
oftentimes
coming at
that
it,
was the
yeah,
preceptor of the behavior anyway,
yeah,
was
exactly.
poor impulse control. And so what's going to go ahead and get me over that hump and do it is the thought that like nobody sees me as anything other than this anyway,
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And I think too, all of what you just said, I really think if we can get to a place where the minor annoyances or even moderate, because PMS, they're
Yeah,
moderate this week. I
yeah.
can't stand his ass. But what I recognized, the switch that flipped for me was, okay, I've been assigning morality and emotion to normal human shit for
Yes,
years.
yes.
Like my husband has no memory, mostly because he's very well, I'm not going to diagnose his ass, but he's zoned out 24/7. Okay.
Hmm.
Like he has a real problem being present. That's something I've had to learn to overcome because I know I I can't really depend on him to remember or whatever without a ton of reminders.
Hmm.
Like that was a huge source of contention, obviously, with my huge ass betrayal and neglect wounds. But I had to stop and evaluate the way I was viewing it, and I was like, you know what? It doesn't make him a bad person. And I feel silly because it's not like consciously I would say that.
Hmm.
But I knew I was storing all of these feelings about what just a bad human he was for forgetting, and like because if he did once forget to pick my kid up from school, things
Hmm.
like that. Like, yeah, I'm gonna assign morality to that, and you're shitty. But when I really just laid down that sword and was like, okay, we just need a better family management system.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm not any better than he is. Like, I certainly have my own things I forget or whatever. And what can we do to attack this problem together?
Hmm.
Versus before, evidence after evidence after evidence after evidence that he is this, we will never be this, we will
Yep.
always be this. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and now I'm just like, okay, how I don't want to live like that because
Hmm.
for me, it has nothing to do with I took a vow and what I don't give a shit about any of that. Like, I just want to be happy. Like, I
Yeah.
want to create my own happiness. So, and I don't want to treat people the way I've treated this man and my former husband. I don't
Yeah.
want to be that person. So this
You,
is all for me, and I want to make that clear to audience members. Like, it's not, you can do whatever the hell you want if in your relationship, but if you want to be the type of human that you want to be, you got to look at things differently.
oh, and you feel so much better. You feel so much, it's the same
Yes.
thing as forgiveness, right? It is forgiveness. It's like
Yes.
you
It
can
is
relax. It's like,
peace.
okay, well, he's not going to have a great memory probably, or
Yeah.
probably the sort of person that would attract the diagnosis ADHD or something like that if
Absolutely. Well,
diagnosed.
and autism. Like, I'm pretty
And
sure he's
maybe
on the
autism, who
spectrum.
knows?
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
so
a lot here.
whatever. Those are useful or not, depending on the circumstance, as you like any
Yeah.
diagnosis. But it's funny. There, I was thinking as you're describing that there are two areas where that sense of moral indignation often arises that I always like to suggest to people. Think of it differently. The two areas are one, people seem to be, and it's funny. I have no evidence for the assertion I'm about to make, by the way, so take it with a grain of salt. I think there's a gene or a set of genes for how on time or not you are. Now, I have no proof of that assertion, but
Right,
the
right.
reason I like to call it genetic is that way I don't have to blame people for it. They're the
Right.
folks who, if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late. And they're the folks who, if you're not 10 minutes late, what's the matter with, it's like they're never on
Right.
time. And there's just, people have different relationships with time that if you can just back off from the judgments, because it's so easy for the folks, see, I'm more of an on time person. It's so easy
Mm-hmm.
for the on time people to judge the others as inconsiderate, to give
Yes.
moral weight to it. Inconsiderate or
Disrespectful.
yeah, neglectful, uncaring, whatever. And then the other very similar phenomenon. Oh, by the way, the people who are tend to be late think of those like us as having a stick up our ass.
Yes, they fucking do.
Because we do, they're right
We
about that.
do. Mm-hmm. We
So they could
do.
say, why are you so mean about, they can assign moral value too. They say, why are you so mean about somebody just showing up 5 minutes late? For crying out loud, get a grip. They're right. So if you relax about that, you should say, well, you know what? That's just kind of how we're wired. So to hell with it. If you're dealing with somebody who's habitually late, just relax a little and don't be so fussy about what time you do things. And people then find their ways of saying, all right, then we better plan much longer in advance. And you figure it out, you work it
Right.
out. The other area is neat and sloppy. Neat and sloppy is a similar phenomenon. I'm guessing
Mm-hmm.
it's funny. I can't be right about the gene for this because I think about my own three sons, all boys, right? Who, when they were in college, I remember, oh my God, I remember one time my wife and I visited my youngest. Um, and when he was in college, in his college apartment he shared with a couple other guys, and we were I think, oh yeah, we needed a bathroom. We were about to drive home. It was going to be about a couple, it was up in Montreal. We were going to drive a couple hours. It was a couple hour drive back to where we live. And so I went in there and I came out to my wife and said, you do not want to go in there. We went and found another place. She did not want to go in that bathroom. Anyway, then they all got married and now they're all neat. So
Uh-huh.
it couldn't be just genetic. There's partly, environment involved in that as well. But the neat sloppy thing is very similar phenomena. It's like the people who are absolute, tend to be neat will think of slobs as all the negative connotations you can imagine of
Oh
slob.
yeah.
Like, uncaring and inconsiderate and, messy lives. And then the
Yep.
people who are looking at the neatnik types are saying, "Oh my God, you have OCD." And sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes they do. Occasionally that is
And
the
we've
case.
had conversations like this around early bird versus night owl.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
I definitely, my husband's a night owl, and I used to be like, what a piece of shit sleeping till noon. Who fucking
Hmm.
sleeps till noon? You know, like,
Yeah.
but when I slowed it down, I was like, that's just what your grandma said. Like, it's
Hmm.
okay. you know?
There are lots of people who
I
do
still
that.
struggle with that one. It really does bug me. But I also recognize that what will drive narratives like that in any of the scenarios that we've discussed is me. So, like, am I
Mhm.
bored? Am I tired? Am I needing help with something that I don't want to, like, bother you because you're sleeping or you're late, or, like, what am I needing that I feel like I can't fulfill for myself right
Yeah,
now, that I'm now pissed at you for being asleep or late, or, you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
So I've worked really hard on the morality piece because at first I tied it to, like, my dad was a night owl. I mean, to be clear, my natural rhythm is a night owl, and in fact, this
Ah.
this 2 weeks, I have had a lot of trouble going to sleep before like 2-3 a.m., which is very. I've knocked myself out with various forms of medication for years.
Mm.
I use medical marijuana for that now, like over the last year, because I am a natural night owl, but
Hmm.
I know that I have to wake up. I want my right amount of sleep, so I put myself to sleep. But he doesn't, because he doesn't think to take the medicine until he comes to bed,
Hmm.
literally. And I'm like, what's okay? That's an interesting choice. But I recognized that my dad did that. That when we
Hmm.
would go on visitation, he'd be up all night while we were sleeping and sleep most of the day.
Oh yeah.
And how I felt about that. And it did
Hmm.
trigger some of that. It did. But it was more just, I wish, I could hang out with somebody and you're asleep, so I can't.
Yeah.
It was all about my feelings of boredom, loneliness, chemical depletion, whatever the case may
Sure.
be. And that's what would drive any of those morality discussions.
Yeah.
But man, I
And
was the morality police.
Well, exactly. And then a lot of healing in a relationship is about backing away from being the morality police. Now, I will note there are some of these, what I'm calling, moderate annoyances or whatever, that can rise to the level of deal breakers. Even if you aren't, even if it isn't about morality. There are
Right.
folks who will say, well, classic example of that is um, two people who love each other, who get along well, except that they're, a heterosexual couple and one of them figures out they're gay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, ain't
Yeah.
gonna work. That I have some experience of that actually. The story of my first marriage is that both my wife and I have gone on to marry really wonderful women, and we're both a lot happier. That's that I have a little
It
experience of that.
happens. Yeah.
But that isn't about morality. That isn't about. That's just about, oh shit. There's a deal breaker, isn't it? And you can be, it's sad, it's difficult, it explains a lot, but it's also, when I say, the ability to be moderately annoyed, I don't mean that never rises to the level of deal breaker, because it can. And it doesn't even have to be things like that. It can be things like, I've met folks where the deal breaker is, oh my God, we're both fine people. We even mostly get along, but I absolutely have to live on this coast and you absolutely have to live on that coast because that's where our
Right.
families are. And it's just not going to work to do long distance, and bummer, but there we are. Or, religious differences or whatever it
Right.
might be. Those are no fault situations, but, even they're not even blaming each other, but they're saying, yeah, bummer, it's not going to work. So that
Yeah.
does happen as well.
Yeah, and you can make whatever you want your deal breaker. We're not talking about people being bad for walking away from relationships.
Yeah,
We're just
exactly.
talking about how to make, if you're wanting to restore or repair a relationship that you're
Yeah.
in, this is the way that we recommend doing it.
Yeah.
Well, man, I have loved meeting you. I want to meet your wife so bad. Um,
Well,
thank
check
you
out our
so
podcast.
much.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so tell me again the name of your podcast.
Couples therapy in 7 words.
I
I'm
love that.
holding up the logo for
Yes.
people watching this. Couples
Very
therapy in
cute
seven
logo.
words. And
And what is
yeah,
the
and
name of your recent book?
most recent one is, I can hold that up too. Betrayal
Yes,
and
yes.
Forgiveness. Whoops, there we go.
Oh,
Betrayal and
I love
Forgiveness: How
it.
to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again.
I love that.
That's the
And I'll
most
make sure
recent.
I include links to all of your, like to your show, to your books, all of the things in the show notes.
Much appreciated.
All right. Well, thank you so, so much. I've loved having you here today, and I hope you have a terrific Tuesday.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Okay.
Thanks for coming to Emotionally Unavailable. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, and share.